If you vanished tomorrow, no one would even notice. She laughed. Everyone else did too, except me. I stood frozen for a moment, the rim of my glass hovering just below my lips. Brielle's voice rang out across the long table, like a bell clear, confident, and cruelly playful. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was unanimous. It coated the air like cheap perfume, lingering, cloying, impossible to ignore. No one turned toward me, not even Nathaniel. He kept his eyes on his plate, as if slicing his steak into symmetrical bites would excuse his silence. I didn't expect him to laugh, but I had foolishly hoped for a hand on my knee, a squeeze of apology, a word, anything. Instead, there was just the clink of silverware and the faint buzz of a string light above our heads. The Whitmore estate hadn't changed in years. The same stone patio, the same trimmed hedges lining the yard, the same antique lanterns hanging from wrought iron hooks. But that night, it felt different. Like I'd stepped into a theater where everyone had rehearsed their lines except me. I was background noise in my own marriage. Camille sat across from me, her eyes flicking in my direction. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just offered a half-second glance that might have meant sympathy or maybe warning. Either way, it was gone before I could interpret it. Brielle lifted her glass in mock celebration. To family, she said, grinning, and to knowing who really matters. More laughter. Walter chuckled. Martha gave one of her signature smirks, the kind that said, "She has a point, but I won't say it out loud." Nathaniel still didn't look at me. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until I felt a dull ache in my chest. I pushed back my chair. It scraped the deck with a loud shriek, drawing eyes. I smiled faintly. What else was I supposed to do? Throw a fit that would only prove their point. "I'll be right back," I murmured, though no one asked. I slipped into the house, letting the door click shut behind me. The noise faded. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and expensive distance. The hallway was dim, the kind of quiet space you hide in during dinner parties when your skin starts to itch from smiling too much. I leaned against the wall, my palms pressed flat to the cool paint. My ears were ringing, not from noise, but from the pressure of holding back everything. Rage, shame, a slow dawning clarity that this wasn't new. It had always been this way. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. They always said I was too sensitive. I whispered, half to myself, half to the echo of every time I'd been dismissed. Maybe that's how they got away with so much. A voice floated in from the porch. Brielle again. She tries so hard, bless her heart. "Charity case with good taste in shoes," she said, laughing. "I mean, look at her. She doesn't belong, but she really thinks she does." Another round of stifled giggles followed. I didn't cry. Something colder than hurt was settling in. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was distance, a sort of untethering. The realization that I'd been holding on to people who let me dangle on the edge of their approval, like a puppy waiting for scraps under a table. I stepped outside again quietly. The twilight had deepened into a dusky blue. Music played low from hidden speakers. I scanned the crowd not out of curiosity, but calculation. They were so sure I'd always be there, so used to me absorbing their jabs with silence. Across the lawn, Brielle met my eyes. She froze mid-laugh, her smile faltering for half a beat before she masked it with a sip of wine. "You're right," I whispered to myself. "Maybe it's time I disappear. You don't just become invisible overnight. It happens in inches, in silence, in swallowed responses." I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the suitcase gaping open like a quiet accomplice. The house was asleep except for the soft groan of old plumbing and the distant tick of a grandfather clock downstairs. The moonlight washed the walls in silver, a kind of hush that made even zippers sound too loud. My hands hovered over folded shirts and a worn leather planner. I wasn't sure why I brought it. Maybe to remind myself that I still had a life beyond these walls. It didn't begin with Brielle's joke at the BBQ. That was just her most theatrical performance. No, this started much earlier, like erosion. Not violent, but persistent. Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. I had spent 2 days baking a bourbon pecan pie from scratch crust hand-rolled pecans soaked overnight. It sat untouched at the end of the table while Brielle waltzed in 20 minutes late with a cake in a plastic box. Martha cooed over it like it was the crown jewel of dessert. "You always know what everyone loves." Brie, she beamed. I smiled. Quietly. My pie was never even sliced. Later that night, as we cleared plates, Nathaniel whispered, "They'll come around. Just give it time." But time didn't bring warmth. It only polished the routine. I packed slowly. Not because I had too much to take, but because I was lingering on what I was leaving. Or rather, who I had been in this house. The guest room had become my default place, never quite a member, always adjacent. A Whitmore by legal name, but a placeholder in every photograph. There was the charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital 2 winters ago. I'd designed the entire campaign. Cold calls, emails, layout, even the final speech. But Brielle had stood on stage and thanked her team. I was never mentioned. When I brought it up, Nathaniel said, "It's not worth the fight. Let it go." I did. Or at least, I told myself I did. The night of Nathaniel's promotion dinner, I wore navy. Classy, understated. Martha met me at the door with a once-over and a pointed smile. "Let Brielle shine tonight, dear. She's had a rough quarter." I didn't ask what Brielle's quarter had to do with Nathaniel's success. I didn't speak at all. A vibration broke my spiral. My phone face down on the nightstand. One missed call. Sophie. I hesitated, then played the voicemail. Her voice soft, but edged with worry. "Are you okay? You sounded hollow earlier. Call me if you can, Clara." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the family group chat. Dozens of unread messages, vacation photos, Brielle's latest podcast episode, a forwarded quote from Martha that read, "Be the bigger person." I didn't open it. I just hit delete. One by one. I erased myself from the conversation they never noticed I was part of. Then I opened a new text, only one line sent to Sophie. "I'll call you when I'm ready." I zipped the suitcase. The final click echoed like punctuation. I paused at the mirror. Same face, same tired eyes. But something had shifted beneath the surface, like finding the floor beneath you had been slanted the whole time and you just learned to lean without knowing it. I crept down the stairs each step, deliberate, rehearsed. The foyer was bathed in blue shadows. I didn't turn on any lights. Didn't leave a note. What was there to explain? Outside the air was still. My car sat at the edge of the drive, just beyond the wrought iron gate with gold lettering, the kind of gate that was designed to impress delivery men and distant cousins. I stepped toward it, heels in hand. Clara closes the door without waking anyone. Her suitcase clicks shut. Her name on the gate reads, Clara Whitmore. For now. They didn't chase me. They didn't even call. That told me everything. Seattle greeted me like a stranger with no questions. The city was cool, damp, anonymous, the opposite of Boulder's polished scrutiny. I chose a studio above an old bookstore where every creaking floorboard felt like permission to start over. The neighbors barely glanced up when I passed in the hall. I liked it that way. My studio was filled with sketches pinned crookedly to the wall bolts of muslin, leaning like tired soldiers in the corner, and a desk littered with fabric swatches and black coffee rings. It smelled of charcoal pencil, lavender soap, and independence. There was no one to adjust my tone, no one to remind me I was too intense or taking up too much space. Mornings were quiet, but not empty. I sat at my drafting table with the soft hum of traffic outside. Today, I drew something structured, almost architectural, a coat that fell like a curtain, concealing everything, yet commanding attention. I titled the piece, Absence. The name came to me before the form, like a truth that wanted to be told. Anita Harper called as I was sketching the collar. "You're in that mode again, I can hear it," she said gently. "I named it Absence," I replied. She paused. "I like that. Sparse, elegant, and telling. I'm not ready to talk to Sophie yet. Or Nathaniel." "You don't have to," she said. "You get to decide what healing looks like. But when you're ready to go from invisible to undeniable, I've got people. I almost smiled. I'm not aiming for revenge. No, she said. You're aiming for resurrection. After we hung up, I opened my inbox. A message from the U.S. Trademark Office blinked back at me. My application for Whitmore Atelier had been processed. The name sat there in all caps, unapologetic. I stared at it for a long time. Whitmore. The name they claimed. The name they never let me forget wasn't mine to shape. Back then, no one asked what I built. No one asked how I stretched my design degree into a grant-winning nonprofit. At dinner parties, they called me Nathaniel's wife. Or worse, the quiet one. I learned how to smile without showing teeth, how to disappear without physically leaving. The first time I launched a fashion scholarship for underrepresented students, Brielle called it Clara's little side project in front of a boardroom. I swallowed that insult like I had so many others guilt-tripping myself for expecting kindness from people allergic to grace. No more. Sophie's last voicemail still echoed in my head. You sounded hollow. Mom asked if you're alive. I didn't answer. Then softer, almost a whisper, I told her maybe she doesn't deserve to know. I listened to that message again, slower this time. Sophie's voice cracked on the word deserve. I missed her, but not enough to go back. The knock came just before 4 p.m. A delivery man, indifferent as a banker, handed me a heavy envelope. Expensive stock. Personalized seal. I didn't need to open it to know it wasn't friendly. I sat down at the counter and unfolded the letter. It was a cease and desist from Brielle's legal team. The words were polished and predatory potential brand confusion, undue association with the Whitmore legacy threat to existing public perception. I laughed out loud, a bitter, genuine sound that scratched my throat. They finally noticed. It wasn't about the atelier. It was about control, about the audacity of me stepping into a name they believed I was merely borrowing. I read it again then, once more, letting every syllable remind me that I was no longer their secret. The Whitmores didn't care where I went, but they cared very much that I was being seen. Brielle's signature was at the bottom, looped, arrogant, unfamiliar with being ignored. My fingers traced the ink. For a woman who used to joke I wasn't cutthroat enough for business, she sure moved fast when I threatened her spotlight. I slid the letter into my drawer and looked around my studio. It was small, imperfect, mine. I wasn't building a brand to spite them. I was building one so they could never erase me again. Autumn leaves danced outside the window, skimming the sidewalk like they had somewhere better to be. I stood and watched them move unburdened. You noticed, didn't you? You know what they say? When people start gossiping, it means they miss your silence. Back in Georgia, the Whitmore estate was glowing with soft candlelight and curated calm. Brielle as always filled the air with her voice, spinning commentary into performance. So now, she's using the Whitmore name on handbags. Seriously, she said with a scoff, shaking her phone like it personally offended her. The gall. Walter didn't even glance up from his plate. Let it go, Brielle. It's probably nothing. But Brielle leaned in closer. It's not nothing. She's dragging our name into her little disappearing act. Across the table, Camille paused wine glass halfway to her lips. Her expression didn't shift, but I knew her well enough to imagine what was turning in her mind. She never liked theatrics, which meant family dinners left her in a constant state of quiet calculation. She rarely took sides, but she always paid attention. Martha cut a slice of roast lamb and waved a hand dismissively. Clara always had a flair for being overly emotional. This is probably just her way of acting out. Camille said nothing, but her eyes lingered on the screen of Brielle's phone before drifting away. Back in Seattle, the light through my studio windows had taken on the bruised blue of evening. I sat with my legs folded beneath me, stitching a neckline with calm precision. The fabric was a soft charcoal wool, the kind that felt expensive against bare skin. It was for a coat I hadn't named yet, but in my mind I called it ghost thread. The silence here was welcome, thick and alive, not punishing, like the silences I'd lived through in Georgia. Sophie's voice buzzed through my phone speaker. I'm tired, Clara. I'm tired of being the one who has to explain you to everyone. You don't owe them anything, I said, straightening a seam. Least of all an explanation. I know, But it used to matter to me, making them see you. Lately, I'm wondering if that was a waste of time. I paused. Camille's asking questions, isn't she? Sophie hesitated. She asked about your old stitches. The ones that curved like a wave? What did you call them? Eclipsed hem, I murmured. It was a detail I invented years ago, something subtle but impossible to unsee once you knew what to look for. Yeah, that. She noticed it on a blog post and wanted to be sure it was yours. After we hung up, I told Anita everything. She's circling it, I said. She just hasn't said it out loud yet. Anita poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from me, elbows on knees. Then make it easier. Stop hiding. Start claiming. I don't want war. Then don't fight dirty. But do show up. I nodded, unsure whether I was agreeing or just tired of debating it with myself. Late that night, Camille sat alone in her guest room laptop, open and untouched espresso cooling beside her. On screen, a design blog known for spotlighting emerging artisans. She hadn't expected to see my work there, at least not under the pseudonym I'd chosen. She clicked through the collection slowly. Scarves, coats, minimalist silhouettes in hues of dusk and smoke. And then, one image stopped her. A close-up of a sleeve just barely catching the curve of a signature stitch, a design only I ever used. The eclipsed hem. Her eyes narrowed, her finger hovered over the trackpad before she zoomed in. There it was. A whisper in thread. My fingerprint. Camille's breath caught. At the bottom of the post was a name. Not Clara Whitmore, just a monogram, CW. She clicked the About page. Sparse. No location, no photos. But the voice of the work, that couldn't be faked. She stared at the screen for a long moment. She's back, Camille whispered. I didn't tag them. I didn't mention their names. I just posted. And they panicked. It started with a blank page and a half-empty cup of chamomile at my usual corner table in the cafe near my apartment. I stared at the blinking cursor, then at the rain streaking across the window. The seat across from me was empty, but I could still hear Diana's voice from our last conversation. People who erase you fear your memory, she had said gently but firmly. They rely on your silence to stay comfortable. I wasn't planning a takedown. This wasn't revenge porn in prose. This was a quiet unveiling, a declaration not of war, but of return. The title came last, What Happens When Silence Becomes Power. The body of the post was stripped bare, not of emotion, but of apology. I wrote about erasure, not by strangers, but by those who smiled through it. I talked about being edited out of dinner conversations, decisions, and dreams. I wrote about the loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded and unseen. I ended it with a question that had echoed in my bones for years. What if vanishing is the first step to being whole again? I sent it to Diana before posting. She didn't touch a word. It's elegant. Honest. Like holding up a mirror to people who've never had to look. I posted it on LinkedIn. Just LinkedIn. No hashtags, no direct mentions, just words. Then I closed the app and went home. I made tea, fed the cat from the shelter I'd finally adopted, and sketched in silence. It wasn't until later that night, when my phone buzzed for the 5th time in 3 minutes, that I noticed what was happening. The post had gone semi-viral. Not celebrity viral, but enough to gain traction in design circles. Editors were liking it. Stylists. Women I hadn't spoken to in years. The kind of people who remembered you, after all, when your story aligned with theirs. One comment read, I don't know who hurt you, but this is the most powerful thing I've read all year. Back in Georgia, the Whitmore estate was bathed in its usual warmth, chandeliers, glowing crystal decanters, half full. But the glow was deceiving. Brielle slammed her phone on the kitchen counter so hard Camille flinched. She thinks she's subtle, Brielle hissed. You think we don't know that post is about us? About me? Camille raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She's baiting us. You saw what she wrote. Being erased by those who smile through it. That's a direct hit. She turned toward her mother. Are you really going to say nothing? Martha glanced up from the table, perfectly poised as always. She didn't use your name, Brielle? If the shoe fits? Camille hid a smirk behind her wine glass. Brielle's voice rose. She's trying to ruin the Whitmore name. First the handbags, now this post. What next? Walter stepped into the room but didn't speak. His silence said enough. This wasn't just a stray post anymore. Clara had become a variable they hadn't accounted for. Later that night, Camille sat alone in her room, scrolling through the post again. She read each word slowly, like decoding a foreign language she hadn't known Clara spoke. She didn't comment. She didn't like it, but she saved it. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment, Diana curled up in the chair across from me, watching the interaction stats climb. "You didn't shout," she said softly. "You whispered. And they're screaming." A chime interrupted her. A message. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I saw the name, Ava Lennox. She and I interned at the same design firm nearly a decade ago before we'd both been broken and rebuilt in our own separate silences. Her message was brief. "This post? You've always had a voice. Welcome back." I smiled and typed my reply without hesitation. I never left. I was just watching. They used to laugh when I spoke. Now they flinch when I write. The studio was quiet, too quiet for how fast my mind was racing. Rain tapped against the tall windows like a ticking clock. My desk was a controlled mess of fabric swatches, coffee rings, and sketches in varying states of completion. There were no assistants, no background noise, just the low hum of my determination and the soft creak of the stool as I shifted, holding my latest design in both hands. A long-sleeved wool dress with clean seams and sharp shoulders. I'd named it Inheritance. My hands hovered over the label template on my screen. It still read Clara Whitmore. I stared at it. Then I backspaced. One letter at a time. Clara Monroe. I let the name settle like dust on hardwood. Unapologetic, unsoftened. "You look like you're about to jump off a cliff," Anita said, leaning against the doorway, a mug of tea in her hand. "I am," I replied, "and I finally want to." She walked in, placing a business card on the table next to me. "Then, at least take a parachute." The card bore the name of a legal counsel specializing in intellectual property and personal rebranding. "If you're going public as Clara Monroe," she said, "be ready for Brielle to come at you again. She's not known for taking things quietly." I took the card. Neither am I. Not anymore. Miles away in Georgia at the Whitmore estate, a different kind of storm brewed. Camille sat on the edge of the living room armchair, watching Brielle pace her heels, clicking across the hardwood floor. She's not tagging us, not saying our names. But everyone knows Brielle fumed, holding her phone like it had betrayed her. She's posting these essays like she's some fallen heroine in a tragedy she wrote herself. "Maybe don't read them," Martha offered calmly, not looking up from her crossword. Brielle scoffed. "She's using fashion like a weapon. She always was dramatic. Now she's dangerous." Camille said nothing, but something about Brielle's overreaction didn't sit right. That night, Camille returned to the upstairs den and opened the family album. She flipped past Christmas photos, anniversary parties, and countless curated smiles. Then she found it the dinner Nathaniel had hosted after his promotion. Clara wore a navy sheath dress she'd made herself. Camille remembered the embroidery, 3 small constellations stitched across the collarbone. Quiet details, easy to miss. She picked up her iPad and pulled up Clara's latest designs under the alias C. Monroe. One of the coats, midnight blue, carried the same constellation motif now integrated into the lining. It wasn't coincidence. Camille whispered to herself, "She never left. She's just been designing her way back." Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Diana arrived in a flurry of wind and excitement. "You need to see this," she said, holding out a flyer printed in bold serif font. Panel discussion. Women who rebuilt from the ashes. Below the title, nestled between 2 other speakers, was my name. Clara Monroe. Real. Public. Undeniable. I traced the letters with my thumb, letting the truth settle in. This was no longer a quiet comeback. This was an announcement. "You're going to speak?" Diana asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes? Not to prove anything?" just to stop hiding. Later that night, I finalized the designs for my launch collection, each piece named after something I'd reclaimed. I was halfway through uploading files when my phone buzzed. A Georgia number. The message was short. "We both know you didn't vanish. I want to help." I stared at the screen, blinking once. The implication was clear. Camille. It had to be. I typed back slowly, deliberately. Then, meet me. No more masks. It was the first time in 7 years that someone from that family asked me what I wanted. Camille didn't schedule a call. She didn't send another cautious text. She showed up drenched in Seattle rain, standing in the entryway of Stillwater Cafe, like a woman who hadn't rehearsed this moment at all, for a Whitmore that was saying something. She looked around, spotted me near the window, and walked over without waiting to be invited. I didn't get up. I didn't smile. But I didn't stop her either. "I wasn't sure you'd show," I said after a beat. "I almost didn't," she replied, pulling her soaked coat tighter around herself. But I figured it was time someone did the hard thing. We sat across from each other, steam rising from her untouched tea. Her eyes darted to the table, to the window, anywhere but my face. That silence used to bother me. Today, I let it stretch until she broke it. "I knew," she said quietly. About the jokes, the whispering. I knew what Brielle was doing. I held my breath. And I didn't stop it. I nodded slowly. "No one did." Camille's voice cracked. "It wasn't just passive. It was willful. Brielle didn't mock you because she was clueless. She did it because it made her feel powerful. And the rest of us let her. I could feel something loosening in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the weight of confirmation. After all these years, someone finally named it." She reached into her bag and slid a flash drive across the table. Everything. Emails, screenshots, messages, Martha, Nathaniel, Brielle. Things they said behind your back. Proof. I stared at the flash drive for a long second before taking it. My fingers curled around the plastic like it was a lifeline. "I thought you hated me," I said. "I envied you," she whispered. "You never played the game." I didn't trust her, but I believed her. That was new. We walked in silence afterward, the rain still steady, the sidewalk gleaming with reflected light. She didn't press for a response, and I didn't offer one. Later, at Diana's home office, I sat beside her while she combed through the files Camille gave me. Her fingers stopped at one message, an internal draft from Brielle's crisis PR team. Reposition. Clara as unstable. Emphasize family tradition. Her withdrawal. Brand Whitmore Atelier as disloyal. Prepare counter-narratives. And finally, do not let her become the protagonist. I felt a heat rise in me that had nothing to do with shame. It was rage, but measured, not wild. Diana looked over at me and said, "They're scared. They should be." The next morning, Camille came back, this time with printed copies highlighting even more strategic moves from the Whitmores. Photos cropped to exclude me, events I wasn't invited to despite being married to the family's eldest son. The erasure wasn't sloppy. It was systematic. "They're working overtime to erase you," Camille said. "But it's too late. You've already left a shadow they can't outrun." In one envelope, I found an old email from Nathaniel to Brielle. "She won't last. She never does. Clara gets loud, then disappears." I stared at that line longer than I should have. "Do you believe that Camille asked?" "Not anymore," I said. "But I did, for a long time." Camille reached for her bag again and pulled out one last document. "You should see this." It was an agenda from a recent Whitmore board meeting. There, scribbled in Martha's handwriting, was a bullet point Whitmore legacy. Jew's family brand remove Clara associations. I laughed bitter dry. I didn't take their name to wear it like armor. I wore it like hope. "They never saw that," Camille said. "No," I replied. "But they will." We sat in silence again, but this time it didn't hurt. There was no apology that could undo what happened. But truth had its own gravity, and Camille had finally stopped floating above it. It was the first time in 7 years that someone from that family asked me what I wanted. And for the first time, I had an answer. This changes everything. I didn't ask for the name Whitmore, but I earned every scar that came with it. The room was hushed as I took the stage at the Women Rebuilding panel in New York. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, but I couldn't feel its beauty. My palms were damp, my throat tight, and yet I was steadier than I'd been in years. I adjusted the mic, looked out at the crowd of professional survivors and quiet listeners, and began. When people say silence is strength, I said they forget. It can also be a muzzle. Sometimes silence is a cage, sometimes it's a forge. I didn't read from notes. I didn't list names, but I told the truth. I talked about what it meant to disappear slowly, to shrink so that others could shine. How I smiled through public humiliation. How family dinners felt like interrogations wrapped in praise. I told them what it felt like when no one asked who you were, just who you were married to. They listened. And when I finished, they stood. As afterward, I didn't make it 2 steps off stage before the first woman approached me. My sister-in-law used to do the same thing she said. Every joke felt like a blade. Others followed quiet murmurs, tears, confessions whispered over cocktail napkins. I hadn't intended to start a movement. I just hadn't expected to be heard. Later that night, Diana and I found a quiet corner booth in a candlelit lounge across the street. She sipped her wine while scrolling through her tablet. "Clara," she said softly, "you need to see this." My LinkedIn inbox had collapsed under hundreds of new messages, fashion editors, survivors, activists, even 3 boutique founders wanting to collaborate. On Twitter, someone had written, "She didn't name them, but we all know the family she meant." Another I didn't realize until today how many people were taught to keep quiet, to stay grateful. Clara Monroe just shattered that lie. Meanwhile, across the country, the Whitmores were spiraling. Inside their estate's ornate sitting room, Brielle stood fuming with a half-full wineglass phone in hand. She's playing the victim to build a brand. Can no one else see that Walter remained seated, unusually composed? "What I see," he said, "is that you're reacting exactly how she predicted. You're confirming the version of you she's put out there." Martha didn't speak. She never needed to. Her silence had always done more damage than her words. Camille lingered by the stairwell. She hadn't been addressed as usual, but this time she listened, not just to the words, but the fear behind them. That night, I received a text from Camille. "You're not the only one who stayed quiet to survive." I stared at the screen, then typed, "Let's change that." The next morning, Diana and I began drafting an op-ed. We titled it, "The Inheritance I Declined." In it, I wrote, "You can inherit wealth homes' names, but sometimes the deepest inheritance is silence. The kind passed between generations like heirloom china. The kind no one admits exists until someone like me breaks it in public." I didn't speak about the Whitmores directly. I didn't have to. I spoke about dinners where voices like mine were too loud, too needy, about being told to understand their side while no one tried to understand mine. I described watching others take credit for my ideas while I was expected to smile and be supportive. The article published at 6:00 a.m. By noon, it had been shared over 12,000 times. My inbox filled with emails people I'd never met from places I'd never been. A retired schoolteacher in Maine, a single mother in Austin, a mid-level executive from Ohio. All saying the same thing: I thought I was alone. Anita messaged, "You just became unignorable." And then, as I was sipping tea by the window, watching light spill across the Seattle skyline, a new email pinged from Marla Grayson, anytimes.com. Subject, "Read the Inheritance." I declined message. "Your story matters, and we know who they are. May I call?" You can't issue a press release to erase the truth, but they tried. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and embossed exactly the kind of packaging meant to intimidate. Inside, the cease and desist letter was printed in sharp legal language accusing me of libelous implication and reputational harm. No names had been mentioned, but they still heard themselves in every word I wrote. That told me I'd struck too close for their comfort. I placed the letter on the kitchen table beside my mug of tea and stared at it like it might bite. Did you expect anything different? Diana asked, leaning against the counter. She'd come straight over once I texted her the subject line. Her eyes scanned the document, jaw tightening with every line. They're escalating. That means it's working. I nodded. They want me scared. I'm not. What rattled me, though, was the statement Nathaniel released that same morning. Vague, well-tailored, and dripping in performative compassion. We believe in supporting all women, especially those we love through difficult journeys. The comments section flooded with applause, sympathy, and admiration. He knew exactly how to perform remorse without admitting guilt. He's positioning himself as the good guy husband. Diana said, her voice flat. Guiltless, heartbroken, and ever so understanding. It's strategic. I closed the tab and turned away from the screen. They want to muddy the water before the truth clears it. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore estate, the spin machine was in full swing. Martha held a charity gala for maternal health flanked by photographers and socialites. Clad in pale blue chiffon, she delivered gentle sound bites to the press. We've been dealing with some family struggles, she said, with well-practiced grace. Sometimes the people we love need space. We've always given that. Patiently. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. She's making you look fragile and ungrateful, Camille warned over the phone that night. They're trying to turn you into the villain before you even speak. She doesn't know I've been building the archive? I replied, sliding a USB drive into my laptop. Every message, every receipt, every silence where there should have been support. Diana looked over my shoulder as I cataloged digital files, screenshots, emails, call logs. Are you really ready to go all the way? She asked. Because this time, they won't hold back. They'll hit below the belt. I looked her in the eye. So will I. That evening, a courier delivered a thick envelope addressed in Camille's tidy handwriting. Inside were several printed email chains annotated with dates and times. Some were between Martha and Nathaniel. Others from Brielle to a PR consultant. Each one painted a picture they never meant for me to see. At the bottom of the envelope was a small flash drive wrapped in tissue. I loaded it into my laptop breath tight. There were audio files, 12 in total. I clicked the first one labeled Nathaniel. March 12th. His voice came through the speaker, casual, careless. Just let her think she's contributing. It makes everything easier. I froze. Another file, Martha. May 8th. Clara's not built for the spotlight. We've always known that. It's best she stays where she's manageable. And one more, Brielle. April 4th. She laughed in the background. She's like a shadow with lipstick. Harmless until she wants something. I paused the recording. My heart pounding, not from hurt, but from confirmation. All the quiet slights, the brushed-aside moments, the humiliation dressed as humor. They weren't accidental. They were orchestrated. I sat back staring at the drive like it had grown teeth. Every scar I carried, every silence I endured, they were documented now. Verifiable. Untouchable. And finally, mine to wield. Clara opened the last attachment and said, "This changes everything. Every family has secrets. Ours just happened to be in print, notarized, and signed in ink." The envelope was heavier than it looked. I sat at the kitchen table, the studio dark, except for a single lamp casting a cone of light onto the wood grain. My fingers hesitated at the seal, not because I feared what was inside, but because some part of me already knew. Inside, neatly folded, was a letter in Camille's handwriting, and beneath it, a document with the Whitmore family crest embossed on the header. Clara Camille had written, "I wasn't sure whether to send this, but if the roles were reversed, I'd want the truth." I found this while looking for something else entirely tucked in an accordion file marked Family Discretion. It's dated 5 years ago. I think you need to see it. The document was titled Amendment to Beneficiary Discretionary Access. Clara Monroe Whitmore. Legal, cold, methodical. I skimmed the first few lines and the blood in my ears began to roar. It barred me from accessing a trust fund my name had been originally attached to, one Walter once told me was just paperwork. The signatures looked familiar, almost too perfect. Nathaniel's, Walter's, Martha's, and mine. Except I had never seen this before. I flipped through the pages, my eyes catching a clause that made my spine stiffen, due to concerns regarding behavioral instability and financial mismanagement. The above-named individual shall no longer be entitled to access any Whitmore-held financial asset without explicit written approval. My signature sat beneath the paragraph. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me. Camille's note continued. I think Walter drafted this after a heated conversation Nathaniel had about you being too independent. I wasn't part of it, but I overheard Martha say it was best to cut off the drip before you embarrassed the family. My hands trembled, but my breath was steady. I'd been embarrassed for years. Humiliated behind closed doors, silenced with grace, erased with smiles. But this was institutional theft, and they had dressed it in legality. I forwarded the document to Diana with one line. "Tell me I'm not crazy." She called within the hour, her voice clipped. "Clara, this isn't just morally reprehensible. This is legal fraud. If you never signed that and they presented it as your consent, there are criminal implications. We're talking forgery, suppression, and potentially financial coercion." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened to the sound of my world breaking and rebuilding at the same time. Anita arrived within 30 minutes. She didn't knock. She never did anymore. She sat across from me, reached for my hand, and said, "You always wondered if it was all in your head. It wasn't. You were erased on paper. That's how they get away with it, by making the victim doubt the ink." "I want to go public," I said, not just for me, but for every woman who was told she was being dramatic while they stole her name, her work, her future. Anita nodded. "Then we do it right. Press packets, evidence folders, timelines. Diana will handle the legal framing. I'll handle the media strategy. But Clara, you won't be able to walk this back." I'm not walking back anything I said. We moved like clockwork. Every document was scanned. Camille sent follow-up photos of the cabinet she found the file in. Diana arranged a quiet forensic analyst to examine the ink, the digital trail, anything that would hold in court. Night fell again, but I barely noticed. The anger didn't roar, it simmered. It focused. By 3 a.m., Diana had highlighted 3 key passages that would devastate the Whitmore's narrative. "They went too far," she said, "and they thought you'd never look." She was right. I sat alone once more. The last page of the document spread in front of me. My eyes lingered on the forged signature, the elegant loop they had copied from a wedding license or a tax form. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me legally irrelevant. I whispered to myself, they wanted to erase me. I'll be the reason they're remembered. They thought I'd crawl back begging. I walked in holding the truth. The law office smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee, but it was the tension that choked the air. I adjusted the collar of my jacket, a slate gray piece I had designed myself tailored like armor, and stepped into the sterile conference room without hesitation. They were already seated. Nathaniel stood half-heartedly, then thought better of it, and sank back down. Brielle didn't bother looking up from her phone. Martha offered a brittle nod, her pearl necklace clicking against her throat. Walter stared at the polished table like it held a script he'd forgotten to memorize. Camille gave me a subtle nod from across the room, seated beside Diana, who was already opening her laptop and placing our carefully labeled folders on the table. I took my seat beside her. The mediator, a man with gray temples and a voice like a closing door, welcomed everyone. "This is a family mediation regarding disputed documents and financial concerns. Let's begin with the contested form dated 5 years ago." Diana slid the copy across the table, eyes locked on Walter. This document removed Clara Monroe, legally still Clara Whitmore at the time, from rights to shared property despite her active status in the family and financial contributions. Notably, the signature here is forged. Camille interrupted softly, producing a second envelope. "Here is a sample of Clara's verified digital signature from the same period, and a log showing no matching IP login from her devices the day this was submitted." Nathaniel blinked. "Wait, what?" Walter scoffed. "That was an internal resolution. We discussed it." She agreed. "I didn't," I said, "because I wasn't in the room. And I never saw this document until last week. Brielle finally spoke, her voice sharp. So what, you walked out on us, Clara? You vanished. Now you want a payday. Diana didn't flinch. Our client has not filed for damages. Yet. But this is fraud. And if taken to court, it escalates quickly. I didn't vanish, I replied, locking eyes with Brielle. I walked away. There's a difference. And I left everything until you dragged me back in with a cease and desist over a name I was born with. Walter leaned back suddenly, tired. You chose to distance yourself from this family. Don't act surprised that we adjusted accordingly. I turned to him. You adjusted by illegally altering documents and stripping me of access to what I helped build. You didn't just write me out of the future, you tried to erase my past. Camille cleared her throat. I found the original memo. I was the one who brought it forward. Clara didn't even ask me to. Martha's lips parted, finally finding her voice. Why would you do that? Why now? Because I saw what we did to her, and what she's become in spite of it. Camille's voice didn't rise, but her words sliced clean. The mediator glanced between us. Given the evidence and the emotional weight here, I'd advise all parties to consider a formal settlement before this moves into civil court. Walter narrowed his eyes at me. So this is revenge. No, I said, standing. This is clarity. I turned to each of them in turn. Nathaniel, who once held my hand and now held statements written by lawyers. Martha, whose affection was always more performative than maternal. Walter, the architect of this quiet betrayal, and Brielle, still too smug to realize the floor was crumbling beneath her. You didn't break me. You erased yourselves. Diana gathered our documents, giving me a nod that meant we had done what we came to do. We stepped out into the lobby, Camille trailing behind, her face unreadable. Before we reached the elevators, we heard the chaos. Clara Whitmore. The flashbulbs hit first, then the voices. Is it true you were cut out illegally? Are the Whitmore facing legal action? Clara, do you plan to go public? One voice pierced above the rest from a female reporter with a press badge around her neck. Clara Whitmore, are the rumors true? My name used to tremble on their tongues. Now it headlines their downfall. It started with a headline quiet, but impossible to ignore. Silenced in the name of love, it read printed in clean serif font across the feature page of Vera and Mode, a fashion and culture magazine, with a reach Clara Whitmore had once only admired from afar. Except this time, it wasn't Clara Whitmore grinning politely in a family photo buried in the society section. It was me, front and center, draped in one of my own designs, standing beside the words I had written. In the article, I told no secrets. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. I spoke about what it meant to be slowly erased, first by condescension, then by redirection, and finally by omission. I wrote about reinvention as survival, about forging art from the embers of a home that never saw me as more than an accessory. I talked about designing in silence, about stitching memory into every hem, and about choosing to reclaim my name not to wound, but to breathe. It went live at 9:04 a.m. By noon, it had already reached the top of the magazine's trending page. By 2:00 p.m., social media exploded. The tag, "She Never Vanished," began circulating like wildfire. First among young designers, then among mid-tier influencers, then, suddenly, everyone. Diana called me from her office giddy. CNN just linked the article. You're national. And it's not just fashion. They're pulling in the legal angle, the erasure, the ownership of narrative. You're bigger than the brand now. Camille texted 3 heart emojis and a line that read, "They can't ignore this. They won't survive it quietly." And the Whitmores. They scrambled. Nathaniel issued a hollow statement by the end of the day. I deeply regret how things unfolded with someone I once held dear. My hope is for mutual healing. It was a classic PR move, vague, calculated, and lacking any trace of actual accountability. Martha remained silent. Walter had no comment. But Brielle, of course, fought back. By 4:00 p.m., her lawyers had filed a new motion against me, this time accusing me of brand confusion and public misrepresentation. They claimed that Whitmore Atelier created a misleading impression of family association and harmed their existing ventures. But Anita was ready. We filed our response that same night, attaching the original trademark approval date months before I left Georgia, before the jokes, before the disappearance. It was legally airtight. Even the judge handling the early review called their claim tenuous at best. The countersuit collapsed within days. What stunned me more than their failure was the outpouring of strangers who didn't know me but claimed to. People shared their stories of being erased by partners, overlooked by families, dismissed in boardrooms. One woman, an accountant in Boston, wrote, "Your line saved me. I wore inheritance to resign from a job that had slowly chewed me hollow." We'd renamed each piece in the new collection after a silent battle I'd won: Inheritance, Resurface, Unquiet Grace. I hadn't expected them to become emblems for others, too. The tide turned fully when a long-standing corporate sponsor of the Whitmore Foundation quietly pulled their name from an upcoming gala. Their brief but damning statement hit the press. "We believe in equity, transparency, and ethical alignment. In light of recent public concerns, we've decided to reassess our partnership with the Whitmore family organization." Brielle went silent after that. Nathaniel stopped answering questions entirely. But Camille stepped forward. In a brief interview with the Daily Index, she didn't say much, but what she said was everything. Clara didn't vanish. She was pushed. She walked away with her head held high, and now she's doing what none of us had the courage to, rebuilding something clean from the rubble. Diana and Anita sat beside me in my studio as I scrolled through the article. I didn't speak for a long time. I just stared at the headline. It no longer hurt to see my name. It felt like truth. Anita nudged me gently. "You should read your inbox." I opened my email. The subject line stood out in bold from the flood of fan letters, press requests, and legal documents. National Women in Business Summit. Keynote invitation. The message was short, but it made my heart pause. "Dear Clara, we've followed your journey. We believe in the voice you've cultivated and reclaimed. Would you be our keynote speaker this year? The theme is Reinvention with Integrity. You are the embodiment of that phrase. Warmly, Dr. Lena Shaw, Chairwoman." My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was momentum, power, the kind that doesn't roar but echoes quiet, steady, undeniable. I leaned back in my chair, watching the light catch on a fabric swatch pinned to the wall. They tried to erase my name. Now it's the invitation they never received. A house built on silence crumbles the loudest. They always said Whitmores didn't flinch under pressure. That dignity was their inheritance. But as I sat beside Diana in my studio, the television playing muted news coverage in the background, I saw the cracks forming hairline fractures widening into something irreparable. The expose had dropped that morning. The Cost of Pretending. The Whitmore Case. Pages of carefully worded reporting on the family's internal contradictions, charity galas for women's empowerment, hosted by a matriarch who'd once told me to sit in smile board positions, awarded to a son who watched me cry in silence. Then looked away, and a daughter whose cruelty had become a punchline whispered in rooms they thought were private. Nathaniel's face appeared in the segment stone-faced, refusing to answer questions, as reporters followed him outside a glass-paneled boardroom. The article had done its job. That afternoon, he was removed from his advisory role with a major tech firm. Crisis optics, they'd called it. Diana sipped her tea and tilted her head. "You expected them to lash back? But this is erosion." I nodded. "It's always slower than people think. Until it isn't." Camille texted me around noon. "Walter just yelled at Martha to get Camille back under control." She said, "I'm not a dog." I almost laughed. It was the kind of message that made me stop and reread, not just because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. Camille was no longer an observer. She was a line in the sand. Martha apparently was unraveling the fastest. Brielle's social media had gone dark since she'd been quietly removed from the guest list of a high-profile fashion gala. The same circles that once amplified her voice were now ghosting her. And with every attempt to spin the story, They only added fuel. We supported Clara in her creative pursuits, one quote read. We always hoped she'd find confidence. I didn't know whether to laugh or spit. Confidence. They stripped it from me piece by piece, then painted me as ungrateful when I stitched myself back together. Camille told me she'd confronted Martha. I could only imagine the scene, porcelain cups trembling on their saucers, Martha clutching her pearls like a lifeline, and Camille standing tall, no longer the quiet wife, but a woman unafraid. You made her disappear, Camille had said. Now she's the mirror. That line hit harder than anything else, because that was what I had become. Not a threat, not a weapon, a reflection of everything they tried to bury. And reflections, they demand truth, even when truth hurts. Later that evening, Diana pulled up an encrypted email forwarded by a journalist, an anonymous former employee from the Whitmore Estates administrative team. It was all there. A strategy memo dated 3 years ago. Brielle's notes, Martha's edits, even a side comment from Walter. Keep Clara out of planning her aesthetic distracts. There were worse lines, crueler ones. But that one stuck with me. My aesthetic was never the problem. It was the fact that I dared to exist without their permission. Diana printed the email and filed it away. This, she said, is your firewall, in case they decide to burn the house down. I looked at the fireplace across from us. Empty, cold, but somehow still full of memory. My studio was quiet. My life, finally mine. But the war hadn't ended. Not yet. When I opened the envelope sitting on my desk, thick, cream-colored, with the Whitmore family crest stamped in gold, I didn't know what to expect. There was no return address, no name. Inside was a single piece of paper. One sentence. Are you finished? I stared at it, and I smiled. A house built on silence crumbles the loudest. The magazine hit stands at dawn. By noon, the glossy headline was everywhere. The cost of pretending inside the Whitmore image machine. It wasn't just a feature. It was a reckoning. I sat in my studio, a warm cup of hibiscus tea in hand, watching the world do what I'd once begged them to notice. Diana sat across from me, her laptop open, scrolling through social reactions and email inquiries. They dropped Nathaniel, she said flatly. Board of Hope Bridge. Effective immediately. Statement says, pending internal review. I didn't smile. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was weight finally redistributed. Down in Georgia, the estate that once felt impenetrable shook in its foundation. Walter slammed the article onto the marble counter. Martha skimmed the paragraphs with a trembling jaw. She's dragging us through the mud. She didn't name us, Camille said from the hallway. That was the public connecting dots. Walter turned. You think you're clever, don't you? Camille didn't flinch. I think Clara was never the weak one. At a gala Brielle had once deemed unmissable, her name was quietly removed from the guest list. No statement, just absence. I can't breathe, she muttered, pacing the kitchen. This isn't fair. That girl, she's nothing without us. Camille stood at the threshold. Then why does it feel like you're the one disappearing? Walter pulled Martha aside later that evening, his voice low but sharp. Control her. She's our blood. Clara isn't. Martha looked up, tired and defensive. Camille's not the problem. She's just not a coward. She's disloyal. She's honest. Camille didn't wait for the end of their whisper war. She walked outside and stared at the garden Clara once offered to replant, only to be told the landscapers had it under control. Funny how things resurface. Inside my apartment, I listened to the muted hum of Diana's phone vibrating on the table. More press inquiries, I asked. One from the Times, 2 podcasts, and one from a university panel on institutional gaslighting. I nodded. I'm not ready for panels. Then, don't be. You already did enough. We sat in silence, the kind that isn't uncomfortable, but reflective. Then, Diana's assistant forwarded a file to her inbox marked Anonymous. She opened it slowly. My breath caught. Screenshots, threads, internal emails, dates, names, a timeline tracing years of coordinated, undermining, canceling opportunities I'd never even known I had. withholding messages, deleting praise-filled notes sent to my work address, filtering out any invitations that weren't family approved. At the center, Brielle. But Martha and Walter had signed off. Nathaniel hadn't objected once. My eyes scanned the lines, the metadata, the timestamps. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the room settle around me. They thought silence protected them, I said. Turns out it only hid the rot. A soft knock at the door startled me. It was the building's front desk attendant holding a letter. No name? I asked. He shook his head. Just said it was hand-delivered. I took it. Heavy envelope. No return address. But on the seal, pressed faintly into gold wax, was the Whitmore family crest. Inside one single sentence. Are you finished? They used to walk into my life like they owned it. Now they knock, and I don't answer. The house was quiet, but not empty. Amber light flickered across the kitchen walls as I lit the last of the candles. Outside, the air had turned crisp Georgia fall at its most forgiving. Leaves curled on the edge of the porch, as if asking to stay a little longer before the winds carried them off. I set the table slowly, placing the ivory plates one by one, adjusting the cutlery, as if the arrangement itself held meaning. It did. The silence used to hurt. Now it protects me. Anita arrived first, a bottle of red in hand and a smile in her eyes. Diana followed, balancing a box of macarons in a folder she swore she wouldn't open. No work tonight, I warned her. Only warmth. They both laughed as they stepped into the space I now called mine. Not because it was large, it wasn't. Not because it was expensive, it wasn't. But because no one else had the key. That was everything. As I poured wine into each glass, the conversation flowed easily. Old and new memories blending into a kind of peace that didn't need performance. No one talked over me. No one made me small. It was perhaps the first dinner in a decade where I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. Through the kitchen window, I caught the glint of headlights sweeping the road. My hand stilled. A familiar black car slowed at the curve just beyond the hedges. Even from that distance, I could see the outline of Walter in the driver's seat. Martha beside him, eyes fixed on the glowing windows of my home. They didn't stop. They didn't wave. They just watched and kept driving. Good. The lock on the front door had not changed, but everything else had. I turned back to Anita and Diana. They always said I was too sensitive, I murmured. Turns out I was just the only one paying attention. Diana raised her glass. To the ones who stayed. To the ones who left. Anita added. I lifted mine. To who I became. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, the toast didn't ache. It rang clear. Later that night, as the dishwasher hummed and the candles burned lower, I checked my phone. One new message. Nathaniel. Still think of you? Always will. I didn't open it. Instead, I slid the phone into a drawer and returned to the table where Diana had begun to tell a story that ended with Anita snorting wine through her nose. We all laughed until we couldn't breathe, the kind of laughter that rises from survival, not escape. No showdown, no explosion, just a locked door and a woman who no longer needs permission to exist. Diana leaned back in her chair and looked at me, her gaze soft. Would you ever write about this? I smiled, finishing the last sip of my wine. Already did. You just read it. They used to speak over me, erase me, diminish me. Now I've taken my name back, every letter of it. If my story spoke to you, if you've ever been made to feel small in your own family, I hope you'll leave me a comment. Tell me I wasn't invisible. Tell me you saw me. Because maybe, just maybe by speaking up even softly, we can remind each other that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes silence is survival until the right moment comes. And if you're still waiting for that moment, don't rush. Heal first. Then walk back into the light on your terms.